This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, and now I have to take a minute here to do our disclaimers. AnCan's grateful to our sponsors, Bayer Foundation Medicine, Janssen, Myriad Genetics, Novartis, Telix, and Blue Earth Diagnostics, and then all the people who visited um, our support sessions and have made donations. That's what keeps the group going, and it helps us get the message out. AnCan respectfully notes that it does not accept sponsored promotions. Any drugs, protocols, or devices recommended are based solely on our own experience or the clinical evidence that we find from meetings or published research. AnCan cannot and does not provide medical advice. We encourage you to discuss anything you hear here in these sessions with your own medical team. So thank you. And I just think it's great that we're here and it's light out, and hopefully it will be light by the time we're still done. It certainly improves some mental health, I think, to have a little bit longer daylight. Um, David, you're up. And if we can get other people to mute, that would be great.
Okay, well, what I was going to bring up is revisiting a topic from the last meeting when we talked about whether radiation therapy is a bad idea for people with a BRCA mutation. And the question also arose whether the PROSTOX test includes BRCA mutations in its evaluations. I really wanted to get to the bottom of this because I'm right now trying to figure out what treatment to undergo. So I said I'd look into it, and I have. Um, I've now contacted 5 radiation oncologists about this, including UCLA radiation oncologist Albert Chang, another UCLA radiation oncologist, Joanne Wiedhaus, who's also a geneticist and the head of the company that does the PROSTOX test. I've talked to a couple of Portland radiation oncologists, as well as my medical oncologist and my urologist. And so if you're interested, I'll be glad to tell you what I found out.
Certainly, I think.
Okay. So
we have the time.
And also one of them was nice enough to actually do a literature search and sent me an excellent review article that was compiled by 19 radiation oncologists and geneticists who met to specifically ask this question. And I'll post a link to that review article in the chat box after I'm done. But in a nutshell, here was their assessment. None of those physicians said I should avoid radiation simply because I have the BRCA mutation. And here's why. According to, I'll just give you Wiedhaus's answer. One set of biochemical processes is involved with short-term short-term urinary side effects, and another set of biochemical processes is involved with the long-term side effects. They're different pathways, and short-term toxicity does not predict long-term toxicity, she said. They're almost always different people, and she specializes in breast cancer, but said that's true for breast cancer and for prostate cancer. Because BRCA is involved in DNA repair, I may be at risk for increased short-term side effects, but she said my long-term urinary side effects should be in keeping with the results of my PROSTOX test, which focuses on long-term urinary toxicity. And so as far as she was concerned, in terms of long-term toxicity, I would be at low risk. Now, I also asked her, does the PROSTOX test, how does that factor in BRCA mutations? And here's her answer, and I'll quote her exactly. She said, we do not include BRCA mutations in our panel, although there is a regulatory microRNA binding site in BRCA mutation, which we test for. In my experience, I have not seen increased late toxicity for BRCA patients. There's a big study about this in breast cancer that said there wasn't increased toxicity for BRCA patients. However, I do think there may be an increase in early side effects. This would make some biological sense as BRCA is important in DNA repair. My medical oncologist, who's also a geneticist, said something very similar. She said, I'm not aware of a strong relationship between BRCA and increased toxicity. There have been concerns with ATM, which is another mutation, but even with that, our studies haven't panned out. ATM is supposed to be a radiosynthesizer, but even those studies which looked at breast cancer patients, because they get a lot of radiation, we haven't seen an increase in secondary cancers or increased toxicity. And in the review article that I'll be posting in a second, the link to it, I can sum up its findings. This is verbatim conclusions. Clinical data overall fairly consistently demonstrate no increased risk of radiation toxicity or radiation-induced second cancers in germline BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation carriers treated with standard adjuvant radiation regimen. Significant germline mutations in DNA repair genes such as BRCA increase lifetime cancer risk, but most do not increase radiation-induced cancers or radiation toxicities. BRCA, and it mentions a few other mutations, should not affect radiation treatment decisions. So that's the bottom line.
So it's interesting that you mentioned looking at it from side effect standpoint. One thing about PROSTOX is that it's set up based on the rate of delivery. So they have a panel that looks at whether you're at risk for SBRT, but then they also have one that would look at IMRT and whether you still have that risk with a lower rate, which I thought was interesting. I think in talking to Dr. Kishan, they were planning to come out soon with a report in the next couple of months to follow up on the initial report on that.
I've taken both of those tests, the IMRT and the SBRT, and came out low risk for both. The problem I ran into with talking with these doctors is even though they were unanimous in terms of you shouldn't have to worry, don't worry any more than normal about radiation, the type of radiation they recommended was they basically fell into two camps. There was the minimalists who said just treat the gland with radiation. Then there were the maximalists who said treat the gland and the lymph nodes and throw in some ADT. So if anybody here, and I'm just, entering this whole realm, so I have no real perspective or experience with either one of those approaches. If anybody here can kind of share some experience perspective on minimalist versus maximalist, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what you think best. Now, I do on my Sloan Kettering nomogram have a fairly high number, like well over 20 or so, 20% for potentially having some spread to the lymph glands microscopically, though my PSMA was completely clear. So just throwing that in. But if anybody has an opinion, I'd love to hear it.
I think Rick mentioned last week that he had some concerns about the effectiveness of radiation in BRCA and that surgery may be more effective in that environment. I haven't been able to see that. In looking at the effectiveness of radiation and doing a search, I did come across something with PARP inhibitors, and they suggested that a single dose of the PARP inhibitor may particularly sensitize the ability of radiation to treat the cancer in someone with a BRCA mutation. And I didn't find any active or ongoing trials looking at that, but I think there has been some data in that. And that might be something that you want to take a peek at as to whether you want to sensitize her in that setting. I know outside the BRCA world, without evidence, it's rare that they would be treating the lymph nodes, and people seem to do just as well, waiting for a recurrence and then doing salvage radiation as doing adjuvant radiation or including that in the initial treatment protocol. I don't know if that's the case for BRCA. And I mean, it sounds like you're talking to well experienced people. And what you need to take from that is the understanding that there probably isn't one right answer, or we don't have enough data to
Mm-hmm.
do one right answer. And that can be frustrating. It can increase our stress level to a point that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
But we should look at it, it probably doesn't much matter what we do. And hopefully that will help. We've got a couple of hands up. Let me see who was first here. I think, Michael, you were first.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment about the fact
Oh.
that there seem to be some data or some report distinction between BRCA1 and BRCA2.
Yes.
Seems like BRCA1 is not indicated in the so-called progressions or the so-called how do I say that, the efficacies of the radiation itself. So if you have BRCA2, there seems to be more indicative that will be more involved for the kind of discussion that David's talking about.
Yeah, you're right. There is a big difference between BRCA1 and BRCA2. They know less about BRCA1, which is the kind I have, because it's a little bit more rare. My understanding, just getting back to what Dr. Mark said, is Rick's objection or concern last time was that radiation would create a greater risk of toxicity to the urethra if you have BRCA. Those people I talked to didn't think so, but then in talking with them in doing this research, another concern came up, which was possibly the risk of secondary cancers, and they also discounted that as a risk as well. So, yeah, it's there's there they what they don't know is much greater than what they do know, especially about BRCA1.
Do any of the doctors suggest sequencing the gene? Um, Not all people who have a mutation have exactly the same mutation. When we say BRCA1, it could be any place in that gene that there's a mutation. So is that something that is done as standard when you show that there's any mutation? Or
Well, my medical oncologist said she wants to have the uh, slides reanalyzed to find out whether the tumor itself has one or two mutated genes. And what she was speculating out loud, and she said, now this is debatable, optional, and not based on data. But if both of the genes are faulty, we might want to talk about, instead of doing ADT for 6 months, doing it more like for 2 years. And I'm not 100% clear why that is, but that's what she said. But she kind of, it was almost like she was thinking out loud rather than saying, this is what we're going to do.
what we often do is we'll first go to what we learned in the textbook and what the literature tells us. And then you go to that spot in your stomach that tightens up when you see something. And we know that a homozygous mutation is a lot more involved. The question is how much more involved and what's the appropriate steps to take. We kind of lack that information. Michael Williams, you're up.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to comment if I'm sure you probably had the genomic testing done of, well, I know Decipher is favored here. I had the Prolaris because that was before I ever joined this group. Um, on my Prolaris, it suggests whether or not you should add ADT based upon that test if you fall into a specific range. Does Decipher do that? I'm not familiar. I haven't ever seen an example of it.
I haven't actually had either of those kind of tests done. The only genetic tests I've had done are the PROMIS Registry, which is the one that told me I had the BRCA mutation, and the PROSTOX test. Those are the only two I've done.
Who did your genetic testing? Did you do it through Myriad or somebody else?
Well, the Mirakind or whatever the name of that company is did PROSTOX, and it was the PROMIS Registry, or Color it's sometimes
Okay.
called, that did the germline test.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked about it here a good bit, but I strongly believe in the genomic testing to help guide you too. I don't know if the DECIPHER gives you a suggestion for treatment adding ADT or not.
The problem I've got is I've also got, besides having 4+3, I've got crib reform and BRCA. So it's almost like, whoa, this is getting a little serious now. So what I've been told by 3 different radiation oncologists is, if we're going to do the gland anyway, let's do the lymph nodes too, because the additional side effects from doing that aren't that much if you're already doing the gland. Now, except for Sokolova, they've all said, with one exception, 6 months of ADT. The exception being Albert Chang, who said no ADT, and Sokolova, who said 6 months, or, like I said, more. So it's all over the map, really.
But that's the story of prostate cancer, as you go from doctor to doctor.
Oh, totally.
I mean,
You
I
see,
one way or the other to 5 different, I know actually 6 different urologists. A couple of them were only telephone conversations, but one of them was an incredible guy who did a totally free consult for me, looked at all my numbers, my MRI, everything. Strangely, he was a doctor, an American doctor who operates out of Mexico doing focal procedures. But the difference in opinions is just astounding.
It's shocking, yeah.
David, did you have large, what they're now classifying as large crib reform, or
I don't
was it?
know. They never rated it one way or the other.
What they're doing now, there's a fellow from Cleveland Clinic, Jesse McKinney is his name, and what he said was there's a lot of crib reform out there, but if the area of cribriform glands is more than twice the size of the surrounding normal glands, then it becomes significant. If not, it's just something to note, and it isn't going to affect the outcome. So again, it's one more thing where you have a lot of different opinions.
Yeah.
John, you're up.
Well, I just want to thank you for collecting all this information and sharing with us. I find it really, really interesting to hear what these people have to say.
Well, thank you.
You are really out in left field with this BRCA1
Oh, yeah.
business, as you well know. We don't even know if that is the mutation that provoked your cancer. It's
Exactly.
certainly come into question lately. And it also, as if everything so far isn't controversial enough, the whole question of PARP inhibitors, is that indicated for a BRCA1 mutation? I think the BRCA mutations were lumped together in the studies that suggested that they were. And the question of ADT is intertwined with the PARP inhibitors, because PARP inhibitors could be monotherapy or dual therapy. And the sequencing of PARP inhibitors with ADT, do you want to get in there early and address the problem, or do you want to wait until you're hormone resistant and then unleash the PARP inhibitors? And so all those questions about BRCA1, as far as I understand it, are really open and really interesting questions. You maybe somebody could argue that you can ignore the BRCA1 from the computations, but you probably can't ignore the cripiform part of things. And so I just wanted to add that my reaction to only 6 months of ADT is that it just hits me in the stomach, like Mark was saying, as a short period of time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Rick, you're up.
Thanks, Jens. I'm just posting this research.
While Rick is doing that, I will just quickly insert the question came up about DECIPHER. DECIPHER is not a predictive test. It will not predict how people will do with a certain treatment. And it's a prognostic test that predicts your likelihood of getting a mutation in the future. So no, it won't answer the question of whether you should have ADT or radiation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thanks, Dr. John. So I apologize for coming in late. I'm just trying to clear up a few things before the meeting, and I got held up. You may have discussed this, but I think there are two very significant issues that I heard David mention. The first is that the likelihood of both copies of his gene carrying BRCA1 are, from what I understand, and Dr. Mark and Dr. John can comment on this, astronomically high.
In the tumor, you mean?
Well, you have a BRCA gene that's been identified as inherited, correct?
Right, I did. One.
And what I'm saying is that that gene, that inherited gene, I'm not talking about a somatic gene in the tumor, I'm talking about the inherited gene, having both copies showing BRCA1 is astronomically high.
In my case, that is not the case. It's heterozygous.
Yeah, he'd be much sicker.
Can somebody explain that to me? I mean, doesn't the fact for the BRCA1 to be showing up on both sides means that David inherited that BRCA1
It's
gene?
not. He says it's heterozygous. So it's one copy.
Sorry?
One copy.
There's one copy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he didn't get it from both sides, correct?
Right.
Right. So I'm not clear. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not clear what Dr. Sokolova is talking about when she says it could be on both sides.
She's talking about whether the cells within the tumor itself, both genes might have mutated. That you can have in a germline, you could have one gene that's mutated, the other's normal, but within the tumor, it's possible that both of them have mutated.
Well, only if you have mutated somatically, if you've mutated a BRCA1 gene, and that I would say is highly unlikely because you haven't had any treatment yet. So why would it be somatically mutating? Yes, we know it's on one side, but to say that on the other side, well, it could have somatically mutated, I mean, it's astronomically high. And that's which takes me back to my first statement. I mean, I think she's clutching at straws, or she may not even understand it. That's a possibility because this stuff is complicated, and I don't know how much gene work she does. But for us to say, well, he's got germline inherited mutation on one side, but on the other side he could have a somatic mutation. I don't know. I don't know what Mark and Dr. Johns would say. The other thing is, I'm not 100% clear based on this BMJ article from last month, whether in fact we should be spinning our wheels on BRCA1.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's so rare, and now that they've actually looked in this study at how often it occurs in prostate cancer, we may not have enough evidence to be able to say that BRCA1 is influential. So I guess the way I would be reading all of this right now, if it were me, is I'd probably discount the BRCA1. A, because we don't know that it has an impact, and B, because it's unlikely that it's on both sides of it's on both sides.
Well,
And
yeah.
focus on what we got to get done with the crib reform and everything else.
Well, in terms of choosing the radiation options, I agree with you, Rick. No, my concern just up until doing this research was the one you raised last time, which is, does BRCA1 put me at risk of more severe
Yeah,
urethral toxicity? And also the other concern being, does radiation put me at greater risk of secondary cancers? And apparently, from everyone I spoke with and the research paper that I just posted in the chat box, the answer is it doesn't appear to.
agreed. I mean, when this topic comes up in AnCan discussions, either in this group or in the more advanced group, I think our position is that we don't seem to think that it puts you at risk. Radiation puts you at risk for additional cancers.
Right.
But that's the general knowledge, unless something else has happened.
No, I
But
agree with, yeah, I agree with that. No, I just meant whether radiation puts someone with BRCA at greater risk of secondary.
well, as you know, that's debatable. And the fact is now, I think we'd have to ask, can we ask whether BRCA makes a difference? Should we be asking whether BRCA1 makes a difference or if BRCA2 makes a difference?
Well, I think it's a good question. I don't know that we got the answers other than the general consensus among the experts I spoke with and the review paper I posted says it doesn't appear to.
Right. I don't know if there's anything in the BMJ stuff that I just posted. I'll be honest, I haven't not read that paper in detail. I don't think it addresses radiation anywhere, but it might do. So you might want to plow through it.
Okay, will do. Will do. Okay.
Michael in Denver.
I'd like to follow up for David. Essentially, I have both Polaris and also I had DECIPHER test, and they're not prognostic when it comes down to whether you need ADT or not. There's essentially been many webinar that I attended. Terra AI essentially can go look at your biopsy and can tell you whether you need ADT or not. So that's something you may want to think about that.
Oh, really? Okay, good to know.
Actually, Michael, I would say that it will try to quantitate the benefit. It doesn't tell you whether you need it or not. You still have to make that decision, but it's going to try and quantitate whether there is a benefit. Again, I'm not sure if that would, the issue of BRCA mutations is taken into account by the Artera AI on any mutations are taken into account in that, and whether it's just looking at various stuff we get from the biopsies. Okay, we have Tim next, but before we get Tim, we've had a few people who have signed in since we got started here, and I wanted to check and see if they needed time. David and Maui, are you going to want some time this evening? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Did you say? It's really fuzzy.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Okay. Joe, are you going to want some time this evening?
No, thanks, Mark. Thanks.
Okay. Alberto, would you like some time this evening?
Yes, please. I'm trying to fix my camera.
Okay. And Mike Wilmert, have you been with us before? I can't hear. Your mic is muted.
Yeah, I can't. Sorry. No, just an update. 30
Just an
seconds
update?
worth.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go back to Tim and we'll work down the list. So Tim, you're up.
Just before you start with Tim, I just want to say, David in Maui, it's great to see your face again, and anxious to hear how you're coming on from treatment. But your microphone is really muted. I don't know what's going on. You may want to go out, come back in again, but we can't hear you. But we'd love to hear you so that we can find out how you've progressed.
Okay.
Okay, Tim.
I just wanted to give an update on my situation. And just to refresh, I'm 64 years old in Tampa. On October 30th last year, I ended my 5 SBRT treatments. I had 3 pathology reports, 3+4, 3+4, and a 4+3. So my treatments ended on October 30th at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa. And on December 5th, I was retested for my PSA, and it was 5.4. Prior to the radiation, it was 6.6. And last week, I had a 3-month follow-up, another PSA. It's now 3.1. So it's heading in the right direction. And my side effects are minimal. And Rick and Mark were right. I'm in that boring part of prostate cancer.
Well, let's hope it remains boring for you and for the rest of us as well. So
I did get my genomic germline testing from the Promise in color, and it really was generally favorable.
I don't know if you had mentioned it, but I had heard at one point some rumblings that Dr. Johnstone there may be retiring. Do you know anything about that?
I have my next appointment is 6 months out on September 11th, and I am scheduled to meet with Dr. Johnstone on September 11th. That's all I know.
Great.
I got a quick question. When you said your testing was generally favorable, could you clarify what that means?
Well, John, I just got it, and I I can't really speak too highly of it, but it didn't point out any mutations.
I see. Okay, great.
No news is good news.
Anybody else have comments for Tim? Okay, Michael, you're up. Michael Wynn.
Mark, and maybe people. The question I have is that what makes a center of excellence designated by NCCN and NCI? Is it based upon the volume of treatment they have, or the quality of doctors, or what makes them to be determined? What metrics do they use to designate a center to be center of excellence?
Rick, I'll let you answer that on John, unless you want to take it.
Well, John probably knows more technically, but Center of Excellence is either an NCCN hospital or an NCI hospital. So whatever is required to meet NCCN, NCI standards. Dr. John, I do know right now that Houston Methodist is trying to get an NCI designation. They've actually hired somebody specifically for that reason to help get them the NCI designation. It's complicated. I suppose we could find out. But John, do you know some of the algorithms that go in there and the standards?
No, I don't know the specific standards, but I think there's a site visit involved as well. I think it's a pretty in-depth look.
I was curious as to whether it's set up across the board that we manage all cancers well, or you have an NCCN designation for a specific type of cancer, and someone would be more apt to get information on both surgery and radiation and active surveillance as opposed to promoting just one therapy. So is there some onus put on them to have a multidisciplinary approach? Would be interesting to know. And I wonder if anybody knows that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is part of it. I'm sure if you Google NCI requirements, or it's easier to get an NCI designation than it is to get an NCCN designation. So they usually start with an NCI. We may be able to ask John when the person at Houston Methodist is actually helping us out with our survey, so we may be able to get some broad outlines. I mean, I know research that there are some very significant research requirements. I know that, but I couldn't tell you exactly what. John, you just switched your mic on.
If you want, I'll ask Jenny. I don't know if she'll know anything about that, but if I don't think she's been there long enough to have gone through an NCCN review. But I'll ask her, see what I can find out.
Well,
it's a great question.
She was hired to quarterback an NCI approval, so I'm sure she does know.
Oh.
So that was the main reason they brought her down. They brought her down there, at least as far as I can determine from Dr. E. That's what I was told. She's there to try and set them up to get an NCI designation.
Oh, okay. I think Voight and I are going to see her in a week or two, so we'll pick her brains a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay,
Alberto, you're up.
Did anybody else have anything they wanted to contribute to on this NCCN and NCI discussion for Mike Wynn? Okay, go ahead.
Hey guys, so I finally found that it was in my junk mail, Rick. Thanks. I kept getting the alerts for the high risk. So I had a RP prostatectomy in April last year, and after the surgery it was a 0.023, and slowly kept getting some increases, basically all the way up until December it rose up to 0.18, and then I had two recent decreases from 0.18 down to 0.13, and now it's down to 0.1 again. And after the surgery, there was an invasion of the seminal vesicle. So the doctor was worried that, there could be, but latest PET scan was 2 months ago, and so far it doesn't show anything. But we're still watching it, of course, every 3 months.
Any comments or questions for Alberto? Did they talk to you about when they might consider treatment, what numbers they're using, and how they feel about that?
0.2.
Okay. Any questions for Alberto from anyone? Let's see here. John S.
Yeah, Alberto, did you have a DECIPHER score? I'm just curious what your DECIPHER was.
The Pirates?
No, DECIPHER, your genome. Did you have it, or Polaris?
No, I didn't. No.
Because I'm just curious what that would show after prostatectomy or radiation treatment, the risk of metastasis.
The findings of the prostate, they said 35% of it was infected.
Yeah, but we want to look at the genomic testing, Decipher Polaris.
Or is it 2
My
plus 3?
my notes say that you did have a germline test, Alberto.
Oh, I
It's like
did.
a color test or something like that for your genes. Is that
Oh yeah,
wrong?
I did have a they didn't know, but it basically says like you have um it did test, but it's inconclusive of what it like. I forgot what it was, but they basically they couldn't narrow it down to.
Should be more specific than that.
Can actually look it up, but
Yeah, I was just worrying just wondering what the correlation was with the Decipher or Polaris versus your Ryzen PSA now. That's all. Right after prostatectomy, prostatectomy, I should say.
hmm
It's been almost a year since your surgery.
yeah, it's coming up next month. At the end of the month, it'll be a year.
How about other symptoms? How are you doing?
No symptoms, no urine in the blood, which is what I had that a couple times before. Um, Still, I went and saw Mulhall. I think last time I was on here, I saw Mulhall at Memorial Sloan, and he was like, "Yeah, you're a candidate within that 1 to 3 year mark to get the full triple package, like he calls it." But he's like, just the RP, radiation, and the testosterone deprivation.
So you had radiation post-op?
No, that's what he was explaining. He's like, after your RP, he's like, with your numbers and like what we saw, that's what you would be in line for.
Okay, so he's expecting that that's something that early salvage radiation might be indicated at some point should you reach point two.
Yeah.
Are they only following along with the PSA? Is there any routine if the numbers are the same? Are they planning MRI or more PET scans, or is it solely kind of based on the PSA?
Right now, it's PSA and PET scans.
That sounds great. Any other questions or comments for Alberto?
Have you guys
Stay
have a
plugged in.
Hey, Boykin?
Hey, Alberto, to stay
Or
plugged in with us, man.
Thanks. I had a question. Have you ever seen any decreases after RP like this, and like going up and down? I have seen that on the Inspire app. Sometimes people will post their PSA, and you see some people will post like that their numbers kind of go up and down a little bit.
Not so much after surgery, I have to say. I mean, usually what we'll see after surgery is either it comes out pretty low and it starts to climb, or sometimes we'll see people who it comes out too high and then they jump right back into treatment. But I don't recall too many who have gone up and then gone down. What was the highest point it got to, Alberto?
0.18.
No, there was a 0.023. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Forget what I just said.
Yeah. So
why am I having decreases now?
I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I would say it's weird. I mean, what about you, Doctor? Did we just lose Dr. Mark?
Oh boy.
I don't know who's doing the record. Well, the recording's still going.
Who's the understudy?
Well, Dr. John and I will muddle through. I think he'll be back in a second. But John, have you recalled? We'll ask Dr. Mark when he gets back. It's really a hard one. I mean, here's one thing that it could be, and I've often heard this as an explanation, and that sometimes, although I don't think I've ever seen it, or maybe I have, going back a long time, sometimes they can leave healthy prostate tissue during the surgery. And it could be that that healthy prostate tissue has, it's, well, I don't know. Mark says he lost internet. So we should say, what should I tell him? We know. we saw, we noticed. What should I tell him? I don't know.
To the tariffs.
I don't know. I mean, but then why would that healthy prostate tissue start to produce less PSA? I don't know. Who was it Laudone? Was Laudone your doc, Alberto?
Yeah.
Have you asked Laudone?
Yeah, no, he says if you 2 to 3 decreases is a great sign. 2 to 3 straight decreases, just like when you have 2 to 3 positive is a bad
but
sign.
have you asked him why it would start off high and go down?
The seeds that are left over possibly are dying off, is literally what he said.
Wait a minute, seeds?
That's how he explained when they cut out the prostate, that sometimes seeds are of the whatever was infected in the area might remain in the prostate bed, and that's usually where it would start morphing again or growing. That's what usually skyrockets the PSA.
So you
That's
mean
what I've been.
seeds of prostate tissue? Or...
Yeah.
Okay. Threw me off with that word seeds. Okay.
Not strawberry seeds, no.
Well, no, it threw John off because we talk about brachytherapy seeds, which are little radiation pellets. That's where John's mind was going, Alberto. But I don't know. I mean, could it be that there was some extra stuff going on around? I don't know. I don't have an explanation. Dr. Mark, glad to see you back. You're muted, so unmute a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Have you ever seen post-surgery a PSA that rises and then declines?
Not really. No, not without some treatment. And usually, I mean, if it rises, that would suggest, I'm surprised at 0.18 that if the scan were negative, they wouldn't treat the prostate bed. I would think that's close enough to that, because when you get above 0.5, salvage radiation is just not as effective as it is as a lower number. I'm a bit surprised here, and I wouldn't know how to interpret this.
Did they do the PSMA scan or not?
Yeah, it's negative.
And it was totally negative.
Yeah, Dr. Mark, what about, why is it going down?
No idea. I mean, you may have had, you didn't do radiation.
No.
And you didn't do ADT. I mean, the only thing I could think is that you had some degree of tissue left and there was either inflammation in it, or the tissue was devascularized, grew to a point and then reverted, but I haven't seen that mentioned. And, that's a hypothetical idea. I think it does mean that there is recurrence, but not every recurrence requires treatment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you are here. And if this stays down, you may have bit the bullet here and or avoided that. and you're home free. I don't
Yeah,
know. Did anybody else say they've seen this in the past?
no,
You
no,
know,
not here. My oncologist has said he has seen this, Dr. Diamond at Summit Health.
after radiation, sure, we see numbers bouncing around
Yeah.
quite a bit, but I haven't seen this kind of bounce. And you had 2 rises. No, was it 2 or just 1?
No, it was a couple since last April.
Yeah.
I had a PSA every 3 months, and it was they all went up, and then recently I had 2 decreases.
So you would, be ascribed to having a biochemical recurrence. The question is it, does it do any harm by not treating at this point? And I think the information that I've seen is it probably doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it does mean that you have to stay on top of this.
Yeah.
Be religious about getting that PSA every 3 months. Any other comments? Let's see. Someone has their hand up. And
David.
David, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Alberto if you've changed your health habits at all, improved your diet, done more exercise, anything like that. I know I did. I haven't even been treated yet, and it's come down 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's been over the course of about 5 months. So, anything like that?
Yeah, ketogenic diet, hot sauna, exercise 5-6 days a week, dropped like 30 pounds. I don't eat bread. I don't eat sugar. I don't eat tons of carbs. I don't have fruits. I don't basically hired a dietitian, nutritionist, changed everything.
Well, that could
High
be
dose vitamin C, like
it might be having an effect.
it seems that way.
Yeah.
It looks at it probably does. Just have to remember that when we're looking at diet, exercise, we're looking at control and managing, and not necessarily ridding ourselves of cancer. It's not treating the cancer; it's managing it.
Right. I agree.
So David also had decreases.
Yeah.
Right, David? Yeah.
Mine's gone down from 9 or 8.9 is what it was originally in August to 6.1 now.
Yeah. But that's a different kettle of fish, Alberto, because you've had treatment. David hasn't had treatment yet.
David hasn't yet. But I'm noticing on the Inspire app, a lot of people are also posting decreases related to exercise and diet.
Yeah, but and that we can tell you, yes, we've seen that. But you have to be selective in what you read on that Inspire app. And what you're interested in is who's seen decreases after surgery. That's your specific question. Don't be comparing yourself, even though what you're doing is great. I guess that it could be that you have a certain amount of tissue left that expresses PSA, and that everything you're doing brings down the amount of PSA it expresses. I mean, that's a theory. So, before you did all of this, when you first had your RP, whatever it was that was causing it to be expressed produced 0.18 at some point. Now you've done all these things, and that same amount of tissue is still there, but instead of producing 0.18, it produces 0.10, just like David's was producing 9, now it's producing 6. But this is all like, we don't know. We don't know, but it could be. Dr. Mark?
Well, again, I was just going to say treating numbers, we get ourselves in a lot of trouble when we treat numbers and forget that there's an underlying condition. There's a lot of things that you can do to make PSA look good that may not the cancer and maybe holding it in check. So not to say not to do it, but just I think the problem that I see on Inspire is there are a lot of people doing a lot of things that there really isn't academic support. The real studies with diet and nutrition seems to affect the length of time that someone can remain on active surveillance. That's the good data that's out there. Short of that, we're just guessing. And it sounds like in your case, it's a good guess. But I don't know what that means for the future. And I just don't think we have that kind of information about the bouncing PSA. What does it mean? We all know about castrate resistance, that the tumors can become independent of the testosterone level. Neuroendocrine, they can become independent of the PSA level. So just know that treating PSA isn't necessarily treating the cancer itself. Any other comments for Alberto?
I just wanted to say in general tonight, it's a very good night for making sure that we're not too proud of ourselves. This is a good night for our medical humility, isn't it? It seems like every question that comes up, we don't know. But we're learning a lot.
But we can be thankful that we're going to solve the problems here because the amount of research funds the government is going to have available is going to be significantly cut. So the solution will not come out of NIH. It will not come out of military funding, but it will come out of our support group here.
Yeah.
Intuiting the benefits.
In Europe, we'll have to see what happens in Europe.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. You know, we always used to think that our country was the leader in all this science, but going to ASCO, there was some incredible work coming from around the world. And I look back at the old thing, it was on the TV show, The Newsroom, where this one reporter asks, what is it about America that makes it so exceptional? And they go on to say, well, maybe it's not. And I think when it comes to science, scientific and medical research, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming from around the world. And it's sad to see that we won't be the leaders in this. Hope we can still have support for people who want to go into the sciences and continue the research.
I'd like to make a quick comment. Since this is being recorded and, you know, I feel it's only fair for full disclosure here. A couple of times recently, we've had issues when talking about politics in the high-risk group. We have a standing rule at AnCan that in the speaking freely groups, we do not talk about politics or religion. And the reason for that is because it's a volatile and complex conversation. Everybody has their own views. And it's also very hard on the moderators to moderate a conversation like that. So we're going to abide by that in the speaking freely groups. I, as the founder, have never felt that we have to avoid politics or, well, we don't really talk about religion in any of our groups because they're all kind of technical, although occasionally we do talk about the value of having faith, and that's a bona fide conversation that we welcome. But we don't talk about politics unless it comes up, but it's not a forbidden discussion. And when actions are taken that I feel go against the very core of what we represent at AnCan, which is compassion, consideration, respecting other individuals. We can't leave that unsaid. And I've had at least 2 people who have come to me and criticized me for that. My answer is maybe we're not the right flavor for everybody. And if that's the case, sorry, but we're not going to stand by and watch $110 million in research money be taken away from CDMRP. We're not going to watch some of our volunteers like Dr. John spin wheels just because we don't know what's happening. Dr. John and I had a conversation last week about making recommendations for CDMRP for this year. For those of you who don't know, CDMRP is a Department of Defense effort that funds about $1.5 billion to medical research, of which about 110 million goes to prostate cancer. And John wanted to recommend new researchers. And I said, John, we don't even know if there's going to be a budget yet. Just because the people administering that program are looking for volunteers for this year doesn't mean to say we have to respond, because we don't know. And it's not, there's a lot of work that goes into recommending a new person. And we've been successful. We have a whole number of people that volunteer. And it's not easy work either. I want to add that as well. So, we're not going to be politically overt at AnCan, but if it affects us, we're going to say something. And I'm happy to leave it at that.
Okay, we still have Mike Wilmert, who has been waiting patiently for his chance to speak up. So go ahead, Mike.
Just a quick update. I was in here last week and didn't know much about my history. But anyway, I was able to get the medical record surgical report, and they did do a Gleason score on the surgery, and it changed from 4.3 to 4.4, or not 4 and 3 for 7, and it changed to 4 and 4 for an 8. So that's information. And then the other thing is I got a hold of Dr. Reddick's office, and they've got an appointment for me in middle of April. And that's about it.
Have they discussed how they want to monitor after this? Simply the MRIs or I'm sorry, the PSA level?
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They may do another PET scan in June, I think.
And what about symptoms after the surgery? How are you doing?
Oh, actually, my surgery was 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I just started on ADT and tolerating that pretty well, except for being tired. It's amazing. But no hot flashes, and I don't think my brain's too foggy, but we'll find out.
So how high did your PSA get that they decided to revisit and start you on ADT?
I don't recall what the numbers were, but they've actually always wanted me to start on ADT since 2015.
Right.
And
Mark, can we defer this conversation to the high risk?
Oh,
do we know that it's spread to high risk?
Well, we know that he was a 4+4. That made him high risk after his surgery, and we know that his PSA's been slowly climbing and he's back on hormone therapy, and that we sent him to Dr. Reddick to see, because we're not sure that Lupron alone is the right treatment. So
Yeah,
Mike, this is a low intermediate group. I don't know whether you realized.
No, I thought I was in the right one.
Yeah. So, because I think you were in a high risk group. The high risk group tomorrow, and we welcome you back to have this conversation, is at 6 o'clock Eastern. So, and you are in Bakersfield, so it'll be at 3 o'clock your time tomorrow. You're very welcome to stay in this meeting, but for certain reasons, we try to stay away from follow-up treatment, because we want everybody to kind of feel that they're going to do well without having to do additional treatment. And then if they do, we move them up to the next group.
Right. Okay. No, sorry, my mistake.
Okay. But come tomorrow, not next week, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, right.
Tomorrow, and there should be an invitation in your inbox tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Same time, same place. Not the same time. Same place, different time.
But same bat station, right?
Yes.
Yep. Well, everybody who had initially requested some time and has had a chance here, anybody else have any issues they would like to discuss or comments about Rick's comment, raise your hand and we'll open up and carry on the discussion. David, great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just had to change the audio source. Well, I haven't been in here for about 2 years, which is because I took a new job and I couldn't come during the day. But I thought I should and I just retired. So I thought I should pop in and just say hi and see who I recognized here and just give you an update, which is the treatment I had, which was in 2022. And for those of you who don't know me, it was 4.3 score, but I had brachytherapy and radiation for 25 treatments and ADT, which was for 6 months, and got through that okay. It took longer than I expected for things to be more normal afterwards. Urinary function and sexual function just took time, but largely are good. And so things are okay. PSA has been very steady at 0.1, give or take a hundredth of a point. And so things seem good. And I guess if I don't know where you all are at, but if it can give you any encouragement that it's possible to come through this thing and all the uncertainty about what to do and how will I be at the end of it and be okay. And I guess none of us know what the future holds down the road, but so far, so good.
David, what was treatment like in finding people you wanted to be with or felt comfortable with in Hawaii? Did you have good resources?
It's more challenging here. There aren't as many providers for sure. I had to go to Honolulu for the brachytherapy. Really liked that doctor, and actually was really, his name is Lederer, Lederer. Was grateful for him because after that surgery, I had a bad infection, went to the ER a couple of times, and they gave me antibiotics, and I was pretty out of it. And my wife finally said, I'm going to call him. And then he said that they're putting you on trash antibiotics. And so we went back, and then he talked to an ER doc and said something else, or he's going to be septic. So had a little detour in the hospital for a couple of days, but all was well. I think healthcare is not awesome on Maui, not a ton of providers, and so you don't have a lot of choice. I did do a consult with another oncologist before I started treatment, who basically said what you're entering into sounds like exactly what I would approve of. So that helped a little bit.
Sounds great.
How's your lovely wife doing?
She's doing well. She's over the moon that I'm retired. So things are good.
Good. For those of you, well, most of you weren't here back in the day. but David always used to come into every session with his wife.
Yeah. So you wanted to hear what was going on as well.
Yeah.
And we met some nice couples through this. You know, it's those of you who are married or a couple, there's quite a lot for your spouse to deal with too. Their fears and what they may be losing in you, and especially with Lupron or whatever ADT you're doing. There's a lot of fear about what happens to your relationship. So she really wanted to hear from people, and then we talked to other people and kind of communicated about how's everybody doing, and that helped it not to feel so unknown.
So David, outside Maui, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to ask David, in Maui, earlier you were describing your treatment. Did they also radiate your lymph glands? I'm asking.
Oh, yes. Good question.
Kind of pondering that myself.
Right. And I came in late, so I missed the start of what you were saying today, but I heard some of it. Yeah, initially I told the doctor doing the external radiation to spare those. And after some consideration, I told him, I think after he'd already made the treatment plan, I asked him to go to include them. And he said it was defensible either way. And I said, what would you do for your relative? And he said, oh, I would probably skip the lymph nodes, but defensible either way. And my thought, I guess what happened in the intervening time of a month or so was I thought I don't want to be treated a second time, and understanding there's likely an increased risk of secondary cancers that's probably small, but I guess felt like judging the two risks. I thought I don't want to deal with this situation again if I can help it. So that was the call I made. And I did have the spacer, which I felt would probably help. So yeah, it's been good so far.
Okay.
You said you had an infection. Was that from the biopsy?
I think it may have actually been from the surgery, but I'm not sure. There was it must have been from the surgery because there was a gap of a month or two between the biopsy and the surgery, the brachytherapy surgery. So, he said
the brachy, you had an infection.
Well, that's what that doctor said. He said, I've had it happen maybe twice in 20 years, so you'd be the second, and it's possible. And that's what I assumed. But, yeah.
David, I would think that it might not be a bad idea to determine on the biopsy whether the cribriform pattern is what they call large cribriform or not. And that might be one of the things that might influence one way or another. Not that we have sufficient data to know for a fact. We know that things like perineural invasion and cribriform may be associated with disease that can be more aggressive. We don't know if more aggressive disease is associated with a better outcome. But it might be something to consider knowing rather than just saying, well, I'm worried about cribriform pattern. If it's a small cribriform or what they call regular cribriform, it may not be a significant factor, just the way we're just coming up with on the BRCA1.
Good idea. Thank you.
Dr. Mark, I assume those remarks were for David S. and not for David in Maui.
Yes, David S.
Okay.
I can't see your face, David. Did your eyes open up and pop out?
No, I gathered you were talking to the other David.
Good. Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts for the evening? We're winding down here.
Yeah.
Okay. If not, we will see everybody in 2 weeks, hopefully. And take care of yourself. And again, we wish everybody a boring prostate cancer.
Yeah, boring. I will just say, we hope to get the recording posted within 2 or 3 days. So keep an eye out, send the recording, recommend that recording to other people. You can get it. You can sign on to our blog and find it that way. You can find it on the YouTube channel. So if you missed anything, then you can definitely re-listen. And a huge shout out to Colonel Boykin in the corner of my screen for making that all happen. We're so grateful to him for doing that.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.